All right, welcome back. We're working on Gem Wars. What we're going to do is we're going to add single-player campaigns. We've implemented a spline system inside of Unity, which we're going to use for moving objects. We're using render targets, and we're going to do something where we erase pixels where our relative object is to create the trails. And that's sort of what we have lined up for today. So before we get started on that, I needed to look here for I'm just finishing one little task here. Create game player VMs. This one. Perfect. UI type font, and we want to add in the UI type particle. This is the last customizable type that we have in the game. So this is a player item game player instance. And it's going to be a game player instance equals a game player.id. My player item ID equals my player.player items UIs. First, where my type is a particle and it is selected, we want to get the ID. And then we're going to add this player item UI type particle. Okay, that's done. So now that we've created all of these, we want to have a new function in here called unlock UI type particle async UI type particle SOID. And then we're going to add that in right here as a unlock UI type particle asynchronous UI type particle SOID. This is going to get all of the UI types, which are type particle SO. And then this one's going to be this value here. And that's it. Okay. So that should do it. That should create our UI type as well as our table entry. So let's go ahead and build this. Okay. We're going to set my web API as my startup project. And I'm going to do on the code first, add migration. We're going to do a clean migration for this. So I'll do a add migration called init. And in my SQL server, I'm going to delete this database. Okay. We're going to do a update database. I'm also going to go to AWS, and I'm going to clear my S3 bucket. Okay, that's done. If I look here at my DTO for a scriptable item for my UI type particle, that's right. So we're going to clear out the bucket now and start the back end. Okay, all the services are running, and we've cleared out our bucket, so we're good to go. So now in our front end, let's open up our code base. Give it a second to update here. Come on. There we go. Now what I want to do is in my data exporter, I'm going to add in here a UI type particle. Like that. And in my opponent, we're going to add in here a UI type particle SO. Okay. In my game player, we're going to add it in here. And this is going to be from my player.player.vm.player items UI types DTOs, and we want to get the first one where my UI type is equal to particle, and it is selected. And then we're going to do a player item UI type particle equals my scriptable object factory.create UI type particle SO. Right here, UI type particle SO. And it's going to be a particle SO where my UI type particle type equals UI type particle type dot default, like that. And then here we're going to do a create UI type particle SO of my UI type particle dot this is my player item UI type particle, and this one is my UI type particle. And we're going to create this from the, we need to have a string for my UI type particle SO ID. And we're going to have this again as a default. like that. And that's going to be for my player item UI type particle dot UI type SOID dot toString. So this one, we can just move this whole thing to be right here. Okay. Now we need to do a new player VM in here. There's 2 instances of this. This is the first one. This is for if we're offline and we're playing as a player. So we're going to add a new one, which is true. My object type is a player item DTO. My player item type is a UI type. My UI type SOID is a GUID.parse of my scriptable object factory dot create particle default SOID. And then the last field is, or property is particle. The other one is here. We need to add in some additional properties on that guy. So we'll do that. You first want to add in a UI type where my ID is a new GUID. This is for a computer opponent if you're playing offline. This one is selected and it's a player item. The player item type is a UI type. The UI type SOID is a GUID.parse of my opponent.UI type particle SO.ID. And that's a particle. So you've got drawer panel set, font, and particle. So we've just got UI type font SOID. Particle. Font SOID. And then this one is a type. Particle SOID is a GUID.parse of my opponent. .UI type font SO.ID. No, UI type particle. So opponent SODTO, which is over in the other project. Doesn't have on it the UI type particle SOID on it. And that's auto mapped, so we don't need to worry about it. As soon as, there we go. Okay. So that's done. So I think now we're ready to create our assets for this. So over here under scriptable objects, I'm going to make a new object called a UI type. We'll do it from a font. UI type particle SO. Now, in my data exporter, I need to export a UI type particle SO here so that it stores on the server. This is a GUID dot parse of my c.id, my SO type equals UI type, particle SO is active, and UI type particle type is UI type. Particle type. Okay. When I look at the back end for where I'm creating the scriptable objects on the database, particle SO, good. Okay. So this is a UI type particle type. And that's it. So now what I can do is, under my scriptable objects, we're going to make a new UI type particle called default. Which is a particle and default. And we're just going to add that one to the database. Come on. I might have to close it and reopen it if it's going to freeze up on me here. Give it 120 seconds. There we go. So we're going to add this onto here. I think it was loading from the cache server. Okay. Now it doesn't actually do anything yet because this is going to change our particles. And if I look at the prefab for this, when I look at the prefab for this under texture sheet animation, I see these particles here, which are being loaded from sprites. So it's like I want to have an array of sprites for each one of these on the individual type. So we can either do that or we can get to work on this. I don't think it's too much work to add it. So if we go back over into the front end, and I'm going to use this font component as my guide. UI type particle component SO. And this is a particle component. We want it for the particle. And then a particle component type. And then we're going to have an array of sprites here. Easy enough, okay? And so now, over in my exporter, I want to have a component. Like that. Now I could upload those sprites as an array of sprites, right? But then I'd have to change my database to support that, and I don't really want to do that. Okay, so this is done. Okay, in my game player, this is going to be my type particle, but we actually want to do one of these. UI type particle component. And then if I look at this, we're going to create this one down here. Create UI type particle components. This is a UI type particle so.id. Like that. So this is going to be called player item UI type font. Here with the UI type soid.toString. So we create all of our components. And then down here, we want to say UI type particle component so. Okay. So that's done. So now we have to fix the back end. This should only take a second. The first thing we're going to start with here is a UI type font component so. We're going to change this to UI type particle component so. And this is going to be a UI type particle SOID. And then this one is a UI type particle component type, which is going to be a piece placed or a line burst. And then in this, we want to add a collection of my UI type particle component SOs called UI types, UI type particle components SOs. Okay, that's it for here. So now in my context, I want to add in here that new table. Which is right here. UI type particle component SOs. And then down here at the bottom, we want to add in this UI type particle component. So we get all of our indices. That's it for the database. So now in my data access layer, we want to add in the new mapping here. And this is going to be particle component. Okay. And so now we're going to add our DTOs here, which is a UI type particle component SO DTO. Like that. And then we also want to have our request here. Which is this one, UI type particle component create request. Okay. So now when we receive these and here we want to create them. So the first one is where we read it. We're going to add in the particle component SO. The second part is where we create it. Down here, let's use this one. Let's make sure I didn't miss any fields. I didn't. So that's done. And that's it, right? Because that creates it. And then we're loading it here. And we're already getting our player item. So we are going to now do the same thing again, where I delete my database. And we'll do a add migration here called init. Says the build failed. That's fine. It's just this. We need to have a particle component. Okay, I'll do an update database. Wait for it to finish. It's done. So we're done here, and we have both sides. Okay. So back over in the game. We should have everything compiling now. This is importing the new DLL from Visual Studio. Now, when I look at this, I'm going to create a new particle component called UI type particle default. And I want to say that this is a piece placed. Like that. And we're going to have another one here. Just two. UI type particle default. And you want to say line burst. Now the reason I'm hesitating here, well, let's put these on here on the asset database first. There they are. Now, when I look at this, there's a color too. Right? I don't see the color being changed. Color is going to nothing. So I think we can do either the color on the individual assets, or we could change it here on the start color. Yeah, we want this start color. So on this, we also want to have a color called start color. Which also means that in the data exporter now we're going to say start color. Interesting, you almost forgot this one. Interesting, almost forgot those two. This one doesn't have a UI type, right? Okay, and then this one we want to say is my C.start color. We do that with this. Which means that now in the back end, we want to have a string called a start color. And then in the library, we want to have a new start color. And then in the request, we want to add in the start color. And then in our data access layer, we want to also include the start color. Perfect. We're going to just add this migration called added start color. And we'll do an update database. Let's go ahead now and set everything to start up. And we're good here. This looks good on the back end. Now there's a couple of things I question, which is one, the material which is on the particle effect seems odd. We'll leave it though. So on these, we also, and we don't have to do anything for these. Okay, our start color, we want to set this to whatever color this is. And then we want to add on here a material. And now we're going to add some fake sprites for tests. So under avatars, we'll go 1, 2, 3. For both of them. Now that that's done, we're going to say that this is my world map render target initial. And so now what I want to do is when I look at these scriptable objects again, all of that looks fine with their particle materials. So in Gem Wars, where we have our effects for our line burst, we can remove all the sprites. So here I want to add a game player SO called game player SO. And now I want to do a UI type particle components. And we want to get the one which is the type is equal to line burst. And then we're going to add all the sprites. You also want to do a particle effect dot start color is your particle effect is your UI type particle component dot start color, and then your particle effect dot texture sheet animation dot material renderer. So we're going to open up a real quick here, and I want to say Unity particle effect set renderer material script. Materials. Particle system renderer. Perfect. Okay. This wants me to use main.startColor. Weird. Okay. And then we need to do the same thing for the piece place particle script. We're going to add up here the game player SO. And we want to get the one where this is a piece placed. Like that. Okay. So here I want to get my game player host equals args dot match player board dot match player dot match players dot first or default, the one which is the host, and we want to get the game player. Just like that. That should do it. Okay, now we're going to test this offline. So we're going to leave this map screen, and we're going to try this in portrait. It's funny, that looks off. I mean, it looks nice, but why is it off? Odd. Kind of looks nice like that, though, so we'll just leave it. Interesting. A lot of these sizes need to be adjusted because of the resolution of the screen. Okay, so now it's failing because it's saying that create players. We don't have this set, opponent, particle SOID. So here, we're going to set all of these to particles, and then it's going to update the cache server. So give it a second here. Now we'll try it again. Okay, so now when we place a piece, looks like there we go. So it's swapped out the particles there. But it's not very fast at this, is it? So if I was to pause this and look at my prefab manager, it says all sprites must share the same texture. So we need to change that. So if I look at my resources, we can just use these 3, 4, because these are all in one texture. So let's just duplicate this for a moment. And then I'm going to jump into my Photoshop. So we want this one. And we're just going to change these things to have a fill of a fluorescent green. We'll do a green and then a blue. And then a red, and then a purple. So on these, we can remove them and add in these 4. And we'll try it again. Still updates for quite a long time. It is changing them correctly, but why is it taking so long? They are all here. Is it the sprite one that's doing it? So let's take another look. It makes me almost want to change the... Let me think. Let's look at the code real quick for where we have my piece placed. Can we just set the sprites? Let's see if it's this stuff here. Because otherwise I'm tempted to just make different prefabs, which isn't that much work. It is. It's one of those where it's changing the... Is it the material? I still think separate prefabs is the way to go. I still see a performance hit when it's doing this. Yeah, it's that. It's when it's changing the material. So... if we did this, this is just a one quick test, and otherwise we're just going to make separate ones, which is really, 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 really easy. That as well. So what we're going to do is a couple things. The first one is when I look at my prefab manager, it's got these effects already in it. So we're going to do this as a new default. Oh, I see exactly what the problem is. So the reason these have been failing is because we don't have this renderer. Now we'll try it again. There we go. Now it's nice and fast. Now the alternative would be to do this with prefabs, but I think this is easier. It does still hiccup. So let's just compare it, how it behaves with a prefab. Now if I look at these, let's just say we had a base mono behavior. Where did that create that? Right here. Okay, and we're going to call this the prefab. So when you place this, you want to take a effect place piece particle script out of the pool . you can take this object out of the pool as a prefab here. So we can say host player game here. And then I can do a UI type particle components. And we want to get the first one where my type is a piece placed. And then we can take this object type and put that prefab in here. And then down here we can say effect dot transform dot set parent to be that. Now we're going to say if my effect is a effect piece place particle script, then we're going to set this. And then over here, we want this to be my line burst component. Like that. And if my line effect is a effect line burst script, then we're going to init it. So let's try it again. This time, we're going to just change these things directly. So now the sprites are here. We're going to go 1. Oh, come on. Like that. Oh, come on. 0, 1, 2, 3. We already have the start color. And then our piece place script. Same thing. 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So now on these, we can change these to be line burst effect, piece placed effect. And I want to say default. And I know that this is going to be faster than modifying every one of those at runtime. So now I can get rid of this and then this. Same thing here. We'll run it again. Now it's much faster because these things are already being set up here in the prefab manager. So now what I'm going to do is go into here and I want to clear out the start color, the material, and the sprites. Which means that on the back end we can actually get rid of that. Okay, that's done. So now what I can do I wanted to check the particle effect. And make sure that they're being named differently. They are. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to open back up the prefabs one more time and swap back out these things for the correct images. Which are these? 0, 1, 2, 3. And then piece placed. 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's done. So we know that all this is working now. So I'm going to do one thing, and then I think we're ready to switch. So let me show real quick what it is we're going to be working on next. We're introducing single player campaigns, okay? So I've created a number of different maps here. Okay, so I've created these number of maps up here. One for home, one for a world map, one for desert, one for a dark area. And we want to make it so that when you're playing against the computer, that you progress your way through it. So currently we have this one map object here, which has a custom shader, which is a multiply shader. And that takes this texture, which is the world text, and then also this camera image over here. And since it's multiplying it, the white is turning transparent, and we're placing this on top. So for our trails, we're going to have a trail image beneath that white image, and as our square moves, we're going to have it erase the pixels under it to reveal the trails. If I was to run the map mode right now, I think we can move this around. And I do have a camera script on here so that if you are looking at this landscape, it does zoom in and follow and track correctly. Another thing that we've added in here is I'm going to create a new game object, and I want to just call it a spline. And we wrote custom editors for this spline here. And you can see that we can have objects trace along it. We can modify the individual points. That make the spline. We can loop the spline, and we can add additional curves in here. So there's a lot we can do with these, and these are what we're going to use to have it draw and remove those. So that's our game plan. Next, what I'm going to do is in GemWars, I want to look at my title manager, and this time I want to post out all of my objects. We can close Photoshop, and on the back end I can select the API. We can delete the migration here. Okay. Do our update database. I've already cleared out the bucket on S3 with AWS. Okay, database has been built. Start the back end, and this time we're going to go ahead and post this out. Okay, everything started here. This is good. The back end is starting, or the front end, I'm sorry. So we don't go crazy, we can kill our audio manager. Everything is ticking. If I look over here on my scriptable object controller, here they are. We've got 3,046 of them coming in. And now we're going to let this post out. So I'm going to take a short break. When I come back, we're going to pick up right where I showed, and we're going to implement our moving ship along the splines and the erasing to show the traces. Additionally, we may start creating some of the structures that we need to control single-player campaigns. If you have any questions what I'm working on, please don't hesitate to pop them into the chat. Also, I put these videos up at youtube.pixelhorrorstudios.com. I'm going to take a short break. I'll be back here in 20 minutes. Thanks so much. Don't go anywhere. See you in a bit.